Consumer choices. So today we'll talk about consumption choices, how changes in income and prices affect consumption choices, behavioral economics, an alternative framework for consumer choices. Higher education is generally viewed as a good investment if one can afford it. Is spending on education only considered beneficial during good times since incomes decrease during recession? That's a great question. That's a great question to ponder. What's a budget constraint? It shows the possible combinations of two goods that are affordable given a consumer's limited income. What is total utility? Is satisfaction derived from consumer choices? So, the concept of utility in economics, let me give you an example of utility. Say you ordered 20 pizzas for the Spurs game, and you hadn't eaten since lunch, so you're really hungry. So maybe the first couple of slices of that first pizza is really good and you really like it. But by the time you got to in the same sitting, we're not talking different sittings in the same sitting. By the time you got to the 20th box and the 20th pizza, you're not going to get the same satisfaction from that pizza, that box, that 20th box, than you did from that first box and that first piece of pizza. So that's what we mean by utility. And we say utility diminishes over time. The more you have of a good or service, your utility diminishes over time. Marginal utility is the additional utility provided by one additional unit of consumption. So, how we measure utility in economics is the change in total utility over the change in quantity. Again, in this concept, we say diminishing marginal utility. So it's a common pattern that each marginal unit of a good or service consumes provide less of an addition to utility than the previous unit. So I talked about the pizza. So that first pizza, that first slice, your utility is probably at the highest. But in the same sitting, by the time you got to that 20th box, that last pizza, I mean, you're more than stuffed. You can barely get it down. Fair to say your utility has diminished. Josh has an income of $56, so this is graphed here. So if movies cost 7, t-shirts cost 14, the points on the budget constraint line show the combination of movies and t-shirts that are affordable. Marginal utility per dollar is the additional satisfaction gained from purchasing a good given the price of the product. So if you take marginal utility over price, if you always choose the item with the greatest marginal utility per dollar spent, when the budget is exhausted, the utility maximizing choice should occur where marginal utility per dollar spent is the same for both goods. So marginal utility for good one, marginal utility for good two, that is equal. That's your utility maximizing choice. How changes in income and prices affect consumption choices. Income, prices, and preferences affect consumer choices. Utility and marginal utility can also be used to analyze how consumer choices change when the budget constraint shifts in response to changes in income and prices. This is an example. The utility maximizing choice on the original budget constraint is M. You see the shift. The dashed horizontal and vertical lines extending through point M allow you to see whether the quantity consumed of goods on the new budget constraint is higher or lower than on the original budget constraint. So in this example, on the new budget constraint, a choice like N as in Nancy, 5 and 20, will be made if both goods are normal goods. If overnight stays is an inferior good, a choice like P will be made. If concert tickets are an inferior good, a choice like Q will be made. So the original utility maximizing choice is M. When the price of bats rise, the budget constraint rotates, and it rotates inwards. The dashed line makes it possible to see whether the new consumption choice involves less of both goods or less of one good and more of the other. The new possible choices would be fewer baseball bats, more cameras like point H, or less of both goods at point J. Choice K would mean that higher prices of bat would lead to exactly the same quantity of bat consumption, but fewer cameras. Possibly, but unlikely would be choice L, since it would mean a higher price for bats lead to a greater consumption of bats. The typical response to higher prices is that a person chooses to consume less of the product with higher prices. And that's because we talked about budget constraints. That's what I want you to remember about this chapter. We all have budget constraints, and because of that, we have to make choices based on that budget constraint. So so the typical response in higher prices is to consume less. Here's why. In economics, we call that either the substitution effect. When a price changes, consumers have an incentive to consume less of the good with a relatively higher price and more of a good with a relatively lower price. Always happens simultaneously with the income effect. So what is the income effect? A higher price means that buying power of income has been reduced, even though actual income has not changed. Always happens simultaneously with a substitution effect. So the foundation of demand curve is changes in the price of the goods lead the budget constraint to rotate. A rotation in the budget constraints mean that when individuals are seeking their highest utility, remember we talked about utility, the quantity that is demanded of that good will change. In this way, the logical foundations of demand curves, a connection between price and quantity demanded, are based on the underlying idea of individuals seeking utility. And they're probably seeking the greatest utility. I want to get the greatest satisfaction out of the dollar that I spend on a consumer good and or service. And this is just a graphical representation. I really don't want to go into this graph. I want you to understand what utility is, understand what marginal utility is, understand the concept of budget constraint. And as economists, we use the concept to show that as prices changes, because of that budget constraint, the quantity demanded of a good will change as well. The traditional economic models assume rationality. People take all available information and make consistent and informed decisions that are in their best interest. It assumes human beings have complete self-control. Fungible units of a good are comparable of mutual substitution with each other and carry equal value to the individual. Behavioral economics takes into account people's state of mind. It seeks to enrich our understanding of decision making by integrating the insights of psychology into economics. It investigates how given dollar amounts can mean different things to individuals depending on the situation. This can lead to decisions that appear outwardly inconsistent or irrational to outside observers. And that's it. That's all I wanted to discuss on consumer choices. Thank you.